All my life, I lived in my brother's shadow. He mocked me, stole my credit, even turned my failures into entertainment. Everyone saw him as perfect, the golden son, the shining example. But I knew the truth. So I decided to burn his reputation, not with lies, not with violence, but with his own secrets. I waited, I planned, and I chose the most public stage possible, his wedding day. That was the day I turned his pride into his downfall. My older brother built his life on everyone's blind faith, so I peeled that faith off, one secret at a time. The words land like a quiet slap, and in that pause you can almost hear the stiff collar of his pride tighten. I am the younger brother they laughed at in family photos, the one who learned to make himself small so the world would stop noticing the bruise behind my smile. He got the inheritance, the standing ovations at graduations, the condescending pats on the back that felt like a chain. I got the empty chair beside his successes and the whispering that followed him like a faithful dog. For years he turned my small mistakes into anecdotes at dinner parties, dressed my failures up as jokes, and called it mentoring. Every joke was a stake hammered into a part of me I couldn't afford to lose: dignity. The desire for revenge did not arrive as a thunderclap. It grew like mold in a forgotten room, slow, inevitable, and somehow more terrible for its patience. It began the night he humiliated me in front of people I wanted to impress. He rearranged a truth into a performance, used my old insecurities like props, and laughed when my face went the color of bad wine. People laughed with him. Their laughter was a verdict. I left that night and walked the long route home by the river, feeling smaller than the shadows of lampposts. That humiliation was the obvious spark, but the fuel had been gathering for years. Stolen credit at work, a girlfriend I had quietly loved being redirected with a casual wink, the countless times he took credit for my small mercies and presented them as his grand virtues. The cumulative weight of those petty violences pressed down until it formed a single, crystalline intention. No blood, no brutal physical harm, just a rearrangement of truth so profound it would leave his name trembling on its high shelf. I had choices. I could confront him and look pathetic. I could silently rage and implode. I could attempt the same public cruelty he enjoyed. None felt fitting. I wanted something else. The slow, judicial machinery of exposure that would make his pride the vehicle of its own undoing. I wanted him to stand in a room packed with people who'd once admired him and have the floor open beneath him. Not with violence, not with slander, but with truth arranged like a mirror he couldn't step away from. So I started collecting, not what spies call evidence, but the softer stuff that erodes reputations. Inconsistencies, private boasts, favors traded for secrets, the tiny hypocrisies that when threaded together look less like eccentricities and more like a pattern. I learned to listen where others spoke, to watch where others performed, to be present without being noticed. Gathering this kind of material required patience and a mimic skill. My brother loved to be trusted. He thrived on confidences. He built small altars of trust, people who loved his charm, colleagues who mistook his ambition for generosity, friends who valued his anecdotes more than his actions. I made myself invisible within those altars. Trust, oddly, was my tool. The plan evolved into a game of invitations and patience. I began with tiny, unremarkable lies about my own life, enough to bait him into dropping his guard. I would show him a vulnerability, allow him to wrap it up into his grand narrative of patronage, and in return he'd give me a piece of himself. A message, a casual remark, an offhand confession about a past favor that had a price tag. When he boasted about helping someone abandon a responsibility, I learned the names and the dates. When he teased about a dalliance he'd had in college, I mapped it against who was sitting with us at Christmas. I kept notes no one else could read, stored in a place only my weary patience could access. I moved like an archivist of betrayal, cataloging the subtle ways he turned people's mistakes into his moral capital. There was artistry to the accumulation, a whisper here, a screenshot there, the quiet retrieval of an old email, the recollection of a drunken remark from a woman whose silence had been purchased by flattered attention and unkept promises. The plan demanded restraint. I practiced the craft of not reacting, the poker face of someone who has accepted that life hands you raw materials and you can either smash them or build something. There were nights I wanted to sprint to the nearest bar and yell the truth until it sounded redeemed. There were days I fed him favors, feigned adoration, and positioned myself inside his orbit so that his confidences flowed by habit. Each piece taken was not an act of malice but of precise design. The more he boasted of his own righteousness, his philanthropy, his clean hands, the times he'd helped women and friends, the more I traced the faint lines of hypocrisy. I learned that people like him do not fear confrontation. They fear the reveal of pattern. One careless boast about a forgiven debt could, if paired with an old ledger and a voicemail, reveal a ledger of manipulation. A joke about teaching someone a lesson could, if tied to a string of broken promises, become a confession of calculated cruelty. So I collected, never shouted, arranging a mosaic in which each tile was a private truth that might, if seen together, look like betrayal. Dramatic pauses were part of the extraction. I cultivated moments where my silence spoke louder than any accusation. I timed my interventions to the cadence of his life. When he polished his image for a new audience, when he prepared a speech, when he courted a donor, when he planned a wedding that would be a testament to his supposed moral clarity. I attended those events as a shadow, quiet, undemanding, blending into background conversations. At weddings and speeches, people are most gullible. Applause is currency and everyone wants to be on the winning side. I listened for the misaligned notes, the offhand comment that didn't match the narrative, the laughter that covered a flinch. In small private conversations after public toasts, people revealed what applause hides. I recorded nothing illegal, nothing forged. My arsenal was truth, and truth is stubbornly free. I learned how to weave those truths so that when the time came, they would hit not as a fusillade of rage but as the chill of inevitable daylight. There is a peculiar satisfaction in planning a reveal that never screams. I purchased time like a careful investor, letting compounds of small indignities grow into something formidable. Each secret I acquired was not merely ammunition but a story thread I could pull at the right moment so that the whole garment unraveled without violence, just the startled gasp of recognition. In training myself to be patient, to wait for a public space that would guarantee witnesses, I became almost religious in my method. I practiced the speech my brother would never make for himself. "Look at the man who saved you," I would say to the room. Then I'd open a drawer of evidence that had taken months to slide into place. It was important the world saw him as he had presented himself, generous, upright, beloved, because only then would the collapse be monumental. The bigger the pedestal, the more satisfying the fall. Yet even as I recorded the facts, I kept one rule: no physical harm, no threats, no humiliations that would leave scars deeper than social ruin. My revenge sought moral correction, not cruelty. I wanted the truth to do its work, to dismantle his false image, to let those who'd been hurt reclaim their dignity, to force apologies that sounded like truth instead of strategy. The months that followed were a study in patient precision. Each morning I woke with one thought: the exposure must feel inevitable, like sunlight slipping through curtains after a life lived in shadow. I learned to wait in places people handed me their truth: coffee shops, alumni parties, late-night calls. I mapped his world: benefactors who loved his smile more than his ledger, colleagues who bent meetings around his anecdotes, women who forgave promises because of public compliments. Names, dates, contexts. My lists were wiring a house so a current could one day reveal the hidden faults. I stitched each conversation to the last. I asked for documents only when it made sense: an email that betrayed a favor, a ledger of unpaid obligations cloaked as support, a photo caption contradicting his public version. There would be no forgeries. My weapon was legal truth, arranged so it could not be ignored. I saved messages people offered and mirrored paper trails still in their drawers. I stored everything under logical labels, not revenge. That method kept me lucid and prevented the affair from becoming a tantrum. In public, I cultivated harmlessness. I smiled at his jokes, clapped at speeches, and offered to help with the wedding. People treated me like the inconsequential younger brother and lowered their defenses. They spoke freely, airing grievances that stunned me. Their loose tongues became threads I could pull. The more he boasted, the more I listened. The more he claimed moral clarity, the harder I searched for contradiction. I collected modest confessions and brittle boasts until a pattern began to appear, its outline undeniable. A timeline became my scaffold. Isolated acts are forgiven. Systems are not. I organized his misdeeds into a narrative, concise, corroborated, and arranged to show motive: the hunger for admiration, the charm that collected favors, the betrayals used as currency. When read aloud, pattern outranks anecdote. I practiced connecting the dots without editorializing, letting the facts speak with the weight of repetition. The aim was surgical, to reveal how small injustices compounded into a conduct that could no longer be framed as playful eccentricity. I found allies, quiet, wronged people who wanted truth but not spectacle. A former mentee supplied messages in which he stole credit, a donor confirmed a matched gift never delivered, a planner produced invoices showing he had promised services he never paid for. They were wary but willing, tired of being smoothed over by his charm. We traded memories like pieces of a puzzle. Names, times, the offhand phrases that later took on sharper meanings. These allies provided more than facts. They gave context, showing how his actions affected livelihoods and reputations. Preparation took on ritual. I read legal guides about defamation and privacy so the reveal would be unassailable. I rehearsed the public reading in an empty hall to measure how each sentence landed. Legal hygiene felt almost sacred. If I reconstructed him from truth, I wanted it to be legally and ethically clean. I also scripted an offer of mercy, a public correction he could perform, an admission that would allow for repair. That window was deliberate. It kept my hands from becoming instruments of malice and left open the possibility that accountability might create space for repair. I collected ceremonial details. The wedding, of all events, offered optics I could not manufacture elsewhere. Packed chairs, donors, family standing witness. I attended planning meetings under the guise of help and learned where microphones would hang, how speeches were ordered, and when applause would hush the room. I placed those I trusted in spots that maximized reach. A donor by the podium, an old friend at the head table, a journalist at the back with notebook and phone. Each placement was a quiet strategy to ensure truth would have the widest ears. There were small betrayals I unearthed that hurt more than scandal. One woman admitted he had offered mentorship in exchange for intimacy, framing it as guidance, then disappeared once the lesson was learned. A business partner confessed being promised introductions that never happened while funds were redirected. These accounts were personal and private. Publishing them required care. My goal was not to rip open wounds for entertainment, but to restore balance by making private harms visible so those who had been dismissed could be acknowledged. I practiced restraint relentlessly. When he told the same self-praising anecdote at a fundraiser, I laughed convincingly and filed the moment. When he paraded his generosity on social feeds, I archived side-by-side screenshots of back-channel messages that told a different story. Each stored item was patient proof against denial. I refused to be drawn into petty social media feuds. My case needed gravity, not noise. The strategy was to make the reveal feel inevitable, not reactionary. Technology served, but I treated it cautiously. I assembled recordings and documents in a secure folder, backed up in multiple places with clear labels. Dates, participants, and context. I created a narrative document that laid out the chronological flow of events. This document read like a brief, objective, annotated, and ready to present. My role had become procedural. Gather, corroborate, arrange, and keep the emotion for the right moment so what was revealed would feel like judgment by light, not by rage. Emotion remained. I did not detach. I disciplined. Late at night, doubt would arrive like a cold guest. Was I achieving justice or indulging in something uglier? I replayed scenes, our mother smiling at him in church, relatives praising his charity, his effortless magnetism. I weighed that against the ledger of harm. The choice to expose was not a release but a weight I chose to hold until others could no longer ignore it. I imagined the faces of those who had been erased by his charm and felt the moral argument for disclosure swell inside me. Strategically, I ensured redundancy. If one witness recanted, others would hold. If a document vanished, screenshots remained. I cross-referenced claims until patterns solidified into proof. This redundancy was not paranoia. It was practical insurance against the social reflex to protect charismatic men. I learned how networks conspired to sustain an image and designed my method to pierce that shield with patient facts that could withstand pressure. I also rehearsed the fallout. I made lists of consequences I wanted. Public acknowledgement, conversations with those he'd harmed, restitution where feasible. I did not craft plans to humiliate for sport. I aimed for visible accountability that allowed hurt people to be heard. I imagined him given a choice: explain and repair, or watch the truth speak for itself. To me, the latter carried the sting of justice. The former, the chance for a rare and difficult apology. In the final 2 weeks before the wedding, every minor interaction felt like a rehearsed line. I smiled in photos, arranged flowers, and pretended to fuss over napkins. Behind the scenes, I coordinated with allies, confirmed timestamps, and finalized the recorded audio that would play through the venue system at a chosen moment. The audio was compiled from consented statements and public records, tied together into a clear, non-sensational narrative. Dates, names, promises, and the quiet consequences of broken words. On the morning of the wedding, I moved among guests with the ease of a man whose performance was survival. My brother adjusted his cufflinks, radiant and unsuspecting. I held a folder that contained the truth I had assembled, heavier than paper should be. The room would decide who wore the crown of honesty. I waited in silence. Part 3 begins where anticipation sharpens into inevitability, when months of quiet collection finally edge toward a moment that cannot be postponed. The morning of the wedding arrived not like a celebration but like a trial I had been preparing for. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of the family home, gilding his suit jacket where it hung, pristine and smug, like armor polished for battle. My older brother was radiant, full of self-congratulation, rehearsing his toasts, and smiling into every reflection he could find. I was the shadow moving in the periphery, silent, carrying the weight of a folder that no one else could see but that contained the truth of his life. Guests poured into the venue in a tide of perfume, polished shoes, and careful laughter. The hall shimmered with expectation, flowers blooming from every corner, chandeliers trembling slightly from the hum of air conditioning. The wedding was more than an event. It was a coronation, the crowning jewel of his carefully cultivated image. Donors, old friends, distant relatives, colleagues, all those who had been seduced by his charisma, gathered to witness him not only as a groom but as the paragon he claimed to be. And I was there, a mere brother, smile polite, suit understated, carrying within me the storm of everything I had collected. I moved through the hall like a ghost with an agenda. At the head table, I checked the microphones, noting how the audio system looped through the speakers. I confirmed with the DJ, an unwitting participant, that the playlist would pause for a special pre-recorded tribute. He nodded, indifferent, his eyes glazed with routine. My allies were scattered among the guests. The donor who'd been burned, the mentee who'd been erased, the planner who'd been lied to. They knew when to speak if needed, but mostly they were witnesses waiting for truth to crystallize. My role was conductor. The orchestra was already tuned. As the ceremony concluded and applause thundered, I felt my pulse quicken. He stood with his bride, both of them luminous under the chandelier light. Cameras flashed. Glasses clinked. Toasts were raised. It was a pageant, every detail rehearsed, every smile aimed at reinforcing the myth of his spotless life. He loved to hold attention. He loved to be the axis around which admiration rotated. That was precisely why this moment was chosen. The higher the pedestal, the greater the collapse. Dinner was served, chatter rising like the buzzing of bees. I tasted nothing. My hand brushed the folder beneath my chair. My mind replayed every note, every piece of evidence arranged like a symphony. This was not revenge by chaos. It was an unveiling. The timing had to be immaculate. Not too early, lest it be dismissed as a drunken outburst. Not too late, lest the room begin to empty. I waited for the lull that comes after the first wave of toasts, when guests lean back, glasses drained, expectant for one final flourish. The microphone passed hands, landing eventually in mine. The younger brother, someone announced with cheerful dismissal. Always the quiet one, but tonight he has something to say. A ripple of polite amusement ran through the hall. My brother smirked, expecting some self-deprecating anecdote, a humble bow to his greatness. He had no idea that his reflection was about to fracture. I stood, the microphone cool in my hand. My voice shook at first, not from fear, but from the gravity of years condensed into a single breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone polite, almost reverent, "we gather tonight to celebrate not only a marriage, but the man many of you have trusted, admired, even idolized." Heads nodded. Glasses lifted. "But admiration," I continued, letting the pause hang heavy, is a fragile thing when built on stories that are not entirely true. A murmur slid across the room. My brother's smirk froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. I did not meet his gaze. I looked at the guests, each one a potential juror in this trial of light. I gestured subtly, and the DJ pressed play. The room hushed as a voice filled the speakers, not mine, but a former mentee, clear and trembling. He told me my ideas were childish, then presented them as his own. He promised credit, but when the article was published, my name was gone. The bride's smile faltered. Guests turned in their chairs. My brother's face stiffened, a flicker of irritation darting across his carefully constructed mask. The audio continued, layering voices, another, this time a donor. He promised transparency, but the funds I gave never reached the program. When I asked, he laughed it off, called it a misunderstanding. Each voice was a thread. Each thread pulled at the fabric until seams began to rip audibly. Screens around the hall, meant for slideshow tributes, now displayed images I had prepared, emails, dates, screenshots, all arranged with quiet clarity. Not doctored, not exaggerated, just the truth, lined up like witnesses too numerous to silence. Gasps rose like a tide. People leaned forward, whispering urgently. The bride's father stiffened, eyes narrowing at the man who was supposed to be family. My brother stepped forward, hand outstretched as if to grab the microphone, but I turned my body slightly, continuing without raising my voice. I present these not to ruin a day, but to remind us that truth matters more than image. Many of you trusted him. Some of you were hurt by him. Tonight, you deserve to know what lies beneath the polish. The audio built to its crescendo, the woman who confessed he'd dangled mentorship for intimacy, her voice trembling but resolute. He said it was just a lesson, that I should be grateful. Then he vanished. I carried the shame for years, while he carried the applause. The room went silent. No clinking glasses, no polite laughter, only the weight of revelation settling like dust after a collapse. My brother's mask shattered. He stammered, voice raised. "This is slander." "Lies. He's jealous. He always has been." But the documents on the screen did not tremble. The voices in the speakers did not waver. The room did not believe the protest of a man cornered by his own contradictions. His bride's hand slipped from his arm. The applause he had cultivated for years had been replaced by the kind of silence that condemns more loudly than words. And then came the climax, the moment where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. I looked directly at him for the first time. "You spent years building a shadow over me," I said softly, microphone lowering. "But shadows can't survive the light." I closed the folder, placed it on the head table, and walked away from the spotlight. The room erupted, not in applause, not in chaos, but in murmurs that cut deeper. Guests rose from their chairs, some confronting him, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Cameras still recorded, flashes still went off, but now the subject was no longer the radiant groom, it was the fractured man, caught between denial and collapse. I left the hall slowly, not fleeing, not gloating. Just walking, each step lighter than the years that had brought me here. Behind me, his carefully constructed life was unraveling in real time, not because of me, but because of truths that had always been there, waiting for daylight. The aftermath of that night was not the explosion I had once fantasized about. It was something quieter, more corrosive, the kind of ruin that spreads like cracks in glass. When I stepped out of the hall, the night air was cold against my face, and for the first time in years I felt taller than my brother's shadow. Inside, the wedding had dissolved into something between a tribunal and a disaster scene. I could hear the rising pitches of voices, demanding explanations, whispering suspicions, snapping photographs that would travel faster than any denial. But revenge is never a single moment. It's an unfolding. And over the following weeks, I watched his empire of image collapse piece by piece, not with fire and fury, but with the soft inevitability of daylight dismantling lies. The bride left within days. At first, she tried to believe his panicked explanations, but the weight of documents, voices, and corroborating faces made denial a fool's refuge. One morning she simply packed her bags and returned to her parents' house, leaving behind a note that read only, "You made me a character in a play I didn't audition for." No drama, no screaming, just absence. And absence, in this case, screamed louder than fury. His colleagues followed. The firm where he had perched as the golden sun of ambition suddenly found its phones ringing with uncomfortable questions. Donors asked for clarity. Former ments spoke up in hushed meetings. His charm, once currency, now felt radioactive. Within a month, he was asked to take a leave of absence. We both knew that phrase was a slow way of saying exile. Our family was torn in ways I had anticipated but not relished. My mother wept, torn between her instinct to protect her eldest and her inability to dismiss what had been shown publicly. My father, always quiet, said only one sentence at dinner: "Truth doesn't knock, it walks in." And then he looked at me with an expression I could not read. Half pride, half fear, as if he wasn't sure what kind of man I was becoming. I became, briefly, a strange kind of confidant to those he had wronged. People reached out to thank me, or to confess that they too had stories but never believed anyone would listen. I wasn't a hero to them, I was a mirror, finally reflecting what they had endured. But their gratitude was tempered with something else. The reminder that justice, even moral justice, never feels pure. I had ripped open a curtain, but behind it were wounds that had been festering for years, and wounds do not heal simply because the infection is named. For my brother, every day became a new stage of loss. His social media presence dwindled. At first, he tried posting inspirational quotes, thinly veiled attempts to reclaim his narrative. The comments filled with derision and disappointment until he deleted his accounts altogether. Friends who once orbited his glow began to ghost him. Invitations stopped arriving. Silence followed him like a second skin. One evening, he appeared at my door. He looked smaller, shoulders hunched not from age but from the weight of having no audience. He asked me why. His voice cracked, not with rage but with bewilderment, as if unable to comprehend that the empire he built on charisma could be dismantled by something as fragile as truth. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't revel. I said only, "Because you left me no other way to breathe." He stood there, lips trembling, eyes wet, and then he left without another word. I won't lie, part of me savored those moments. To see him stripped of his smirk, to see the arrogance collapse, it was a satisfaction I had earned. But another part of me carried a strange ache. Revenge had not made me lighter forever, it had merely shifted the burden. I had destroyed the myth of my brother, but myths are not just his, they belong to families, to communities. In burning his, I had scorched the edges of my own. Yet justice is not always neat. The people he had hurt were finally heard. One by one, I saw them reclaim dignity. The mentee published her own article, this time with her name alone in bold print. The donor redirected funds to an organization with actual transparency. The woman he had exploited found, in the public reckoning, a chorus of support instead of the silence she once carried. These were victories. Not mine, but theirs. I had only turned on the light. Meanwhile, I adjusted to being seen differently. Once dismissed as the quiet brother, I was now treated with a wary respect. Some called me brave. Others whispered words like vindictive, calculating. Both were true, perhaps. I had been brave enough to gather, patient enough to wait, and ruthless enough to strike when the moment mattered. That combination unsettled people. They smiled at me, but some also avoided my gaze, as though wondering if I carried folders on them too. And my brother? He retreated further. I heard whispers that he had moved in with a friend, then with no one. That he applied for jobs but references betrayed him. That he tried to apologize privately, but apologies spoken after exposure ring hollow. His pride, once his crown, was now his noose. He hadn't learned humility, he had only learned fear. There was, however, one unexpected twist. Months after the wedding, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just his handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. Inside, a single page. He wrote, "You were right. I wore masks until I forgot my own face. I don't know who I am without them. I hate you for showing everyone, but I hate myself more for needing it. If there's a way back, I can't see it yet." I read that letter a dozen times. For the first time, I glimpsed not the tyrant of my youth, but a broken man staring into a mirror he couldn't escape. Was that redemption? Was it merely self-pity? I didn't know. All I knew was that for the first time, his words felt stripped of performance. They were ugly, but they were his. That night I burned the letter, not out of anger, but to free myself from the temptation to play judge forever. His journey, whatever it would be, was no longer mine to orchestrate. I had delivered justice, not salvation. The difference mattered. So here I sit, months after the grand reveal, replaying the echoes of that night. The silence that followed my words was louder than any applause. The aftermath has been messy, imperfect, tinged with regret, but also undeniable in its justice. My brother lost the stage he never deserved. I gained something too, but whether it was freedom or a new kind of burden, I am still deciding. People always imagine vengeance as a clean cut, a final chapter where the villain falls and the hero walks away lighter. But life doesn't deal in final chapters. It deals in aftermaths, consequences, and the quiet reckoning of nights when you lie awake, staring at a ceiling, wondering if justice ever truly balances the scale. In the months that followed my brother's public unmasking, the story spread far beyond our family or his circle. The wedding video, hacked by curiosity and shared in fragments, leaked into wider networks. A shaky clip of my speech made its way online, stripped of context, captioned with clickbait titles like "Groom exposed by his own brother during wedding toast." It went viral, not because people cared about justice, but because people love spectacle. Strangers dissected us as if we were characters in a drama. Some hailed me as courageous, others painted me as bitter, jealous, cruel. I learned quickly that when you weaponize truth, you don't control how it travels. The narrative slipped from my hands. Memes mocked my brother's stunned expression. Think pieces debated whether public shaming is ever justified. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, not to ask how I was, but to feed on gossip. Justice had been my aim, but entertainment was how the world consumed it. That realization left me with a strange, bitter taste. Victory hollowed by spectacle. And my brother? He became a ghost in the same spaces where he was once a star. Employers refused to take the risk. Old friends who tried to defend him found themselves dragged into the whirlwind of evidence. He moved to a smaller town, far enough to avoid recognition but close enough that whispers still reached me. His pride had been amputated, but not cleanly. He stumbled through denial, rage, brief apologies, and finally into silence. I sometimes wondered whether he was rebuilding in private or simply decaying unseen. Our family adapted awkwardly. Holidays became minefields. My mother, forever caught between sons, tried to paper over fractures with forced cheer, but silence hung heavier than decorations. My father remained taciturn, as if justice was a ledger finally balanced but too painful to celebrate. Cousins split into camps, some grateful I had revealed the truth, others resentful I had ruined the illusion of a perfect family. The fracture lines I had carved would never fully heal. And me. I carried a dual identity. To some, I was the avenger, the shadow turned into light, the brother who refused to be silenced. To others, I was dangerous, someone who could smile politely while sharpening a knife behind his back. Both versions followed me into every room. I became careful with what I said, measured with what I shared. Once, I had been invisible. Now, I was seen too much, in ways that made me feel like a stranger inside my own skin. There were nights I replayed that evening in the hall. The silence, the gasps, my brother's face collapsing into disbelief. A part of me still savored it, like sipping from a bitter cup. But another part wondered whether I had scorched more than his reputation, whether I had burned something inside myself, too. Revenge is intoxicating, yes, but it's also corrosive. It leaves you questioning whether the justice you delivered was pure or poisoned by the satisfaction it brought. Yet I cannot deny the good. The people he had wronged found their voices amplified. The mentee who'd been erased built a thriving career, free of his shadow. The donor's funds went to a project that flourished transparently. The woman he exploited found solidarity and spoke publicly, inspiring others to share their own stories. These were not my victories, but they would not have happened without the light I had forced into the room. That truth steadied me when doubt threatened to overwhelm. Then came the unexpected turn. Nearly a year after the wedding, I received a message through an old friend. My brother wanted to meet. I debated for weeks before agreeing. We met in a small cafe, far from the city, the kind of place where no one would recognize him. He looked older, thinner, stripped of the polish he once wore like armor. His voice was quieter, not the booming cadence of a man who loved audiences, but the tentative tone of someone unsure if they still deserved to be heard. "I hated you," he admitted, stirring his coffee. "I still do sometimes. But I know why you did it. And I know it was the only way anyone would listen." His eyes met mine, stripped of pretense. "You ended me. But maybe you also saved me." I didn't reply immediately. What could I say? That I hadn't done it to save him, but to save myself, to claw my dignity back from the pit he kept me in? That justice and cruelty had walked hand in hand that night, and I wasn't sure which one held tighter. Instead, I nodded. Sometimes silence is kinder than truth. We parted without resolution. No forgiveness, no embrace. Just two brothers walking in opposite directions, carrying the weight of a story that could never be unwritten. Perhaps that was the closest we would ever come to peace. And so, the story ends not with fireworks, but with embers. My brother lives in the ruins of his pride. I live with the knowledge that I struck the match. The world moved on, as it always does, hungry for the next spectacle. But I know the echoes remain, in every family gathering, every whispered memory, every glance that lingers too long. Revenge gave me justice. It also gave me a burden. And maybe that's the true cost. You don't just destroy your enemy, you carry the ashes with you. So now I turn to you. If you were me, standing in that hall with the power to unravel a life built on lies, would you have done it? Would you risk carrying that burden forever for the sake of truth? Or would you let the shadow live, and keep your own hands clean?